Hey, it's Andrea. Today, we geek out about period costumes. We meet a sentient hologram, and we don't bat an eyelash when Pulaski gets kidnapped. Stay tuned and find out why.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Shereese, today we're talking about possibly one of the best episodes ever of Star Trek TNG. Possibly. I mean, that's a big claim, but I think certainly one of the best episodes of season 2. This is season 2, episode 3, Elementary Dear Data. It was written by Brian Allen Lane, directed by Rob Bowman, and the star date is 42286.3. Shereese, this is the Data holodeck Sherlock Holmes trifecta of joy. How psyched were you about this episode?
I love this episode. This is just such a good one. I really like this episode. I'm excited for us to talk about it today.
Oh, definitely. All right, let me just jump right in. So here's what's happening in Elementary Dear Data. When the crew has a bit of leisure time, Geordi LaForge and Commander Data go to the holodeck to recreate a Sherlock Holmes mystery. Data, playing Holmes, has memorized all of the Holmes stories and recognizes and solves the mysteries within minutes. Frustrated, Geordi leaves the holodeck, leaving Data confused. Geordi later explains that the fun is in solving the unknown, but Data doesn't understand that concept. Overhearing their conversation, Dr. Pulaski asserts that Data is incapable of solving a mystery to which he does not already know the outcome. Data accepts her challenge and invites her to join them on the holodeck. There, Geordi instructs a computer to create a unique Sherlock Holmes mystery with an adversary who's capable of defeating Data.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yes. I feel like that's how all of our synopses should end.
Yeah, let's get a sound effect in there someday.
on it. It'll be there next week. So I do have some trivia. Actually, I have a lot of trivia and deep dives. Those of you who enjoy the deep dives. I'm going to try to sprinkle those throughout. But to start off, Elementary Dear Data was nominated for 2 Emmys. This episode, for outstanding art director. So like set director, costume design.
It was beautifully done. Beautifully done.
It was just so great. It was, I mean, you're going from this like sharp, cold aesthetic, like clean, of the Enterprise to these like overstuffed armchairs, books on every shelf, knickknacks everywhere. It's just a smoky London. It's just a different, completely different world. And it translated so beautifully on screen.
Yeah, totally. And so clearly you guys can hear how our overview kind of is already going. Like our big thought is that this episode's beautiful. It's amazing. It was just a joy to watch. And actually, this was we've seen the holodeck quite a bit in the first season, and that was a new addition in TNG. There was no holodeck in the original series, thanks to one of our guests letting us know that because we didn't know. And so we've seen the holodeck several times. However, this is only the second episode that takes place almost entirely in the holodeck. The other one was The Big Goodbye, which was kind of like a 20s time, and now we're back in the 1800s in London. And oh my gosh, the costumes, the smokiness, the little like chemistry sets, it's just so delicious.
Even just the sounds of like the heels clip-clopping on the like cobblestone. Yeah, it's amazing. So it's interesting that you bring up the Big Goodbye, because after how much fun everybody had writing and filming The Big Goodbye, the crew was like, okay, in season 2 we absolutely need to do another one. And so I was reading that like one of the writers had said like it wasn't even like a conscious decision that somebody was like, let's make another holodeck episode. It just, everything sort of fell into place. Like Data in season 1, kind of with the magnifying glass and the smoking pipe, and then how much fun they had in the first episode, in the first season with The Big Goodbye. They said it just kind of like wrote itself. Like it just sort of like appeared to everyone at the same time. Like this is the next natural step. So it was just such a great episode. So should we just jump right on in?
Yeah, let's do it. So it opens up with Geordi saying, urgent, I need to see Data. And Data's like, what's going on? And he comes in and he sees that that Geordi has built this incredible model ship of an old ship called the Victory, which I know nothing about. And I'm guessing, Andrea, you maybe have done a deep dive on what the heck that is. but whatever, an old ship. And it's gorgeous. It's huge. It must have taken forever for like an actual model builder to actually build that. Or maybe they fabricated it. I don't know what they did. But my point is when I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm glad to see that model making is still a hobby in the 24th century. Cause that's like such a thing, you know? So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. You know what? I wish I would have done a deep dive on that. Oh, now I feel like I missed an opportunity, but we do
have some opportunities.
Dang it.
The rest of the
episode. So Geordi does say like, I served as an ensign on the USS Victory. So it's a gift for the captain that I served with. And I love that Data is surprised. He's like, this isn't replicated? He's like, no, that's the whole point of giving a gift like this. You make it by hand. And I did think to myself, as if Geordi had made it, I was like, the amount of time you must spend like untangling little fine like cords to tie the lines and all that. Like it was so beautiful. It was beautiful. And I love that they have a couple of days to wait for the Victory to show up. So they've got nothing to do but just sit around and have fun. And I love that when Geordi says like, oh, I did call you here for a reason other than the Victory, which also, why are you working on this model ship in main engineering? You have weird. Quarters. Yeah. You have quarters and stuff for that.
I agree. I was kind of like, weird. Why is that like in the middle of your office, like where people work and anyone could stumble and fall into it? There's no force field around it or glass shield. However, I can appreciate it from the standpoint of, I really like when Star Trek kind of appreciates old technology. And they're just like, man, this was amazing, because you know what? It was amazing. Like it is amazing. Ships that can have all these people and somehow not sink, planes that are in the air and somehow not fall, and you know, spaceships traveling through intergalactic space. Like they're all amazing. And so I really could also see that just the engineering of such a device could be really appreciated in engineering more than anywhere else in the ship, you know, where other people could be like, ooh, look at that. Or just like, oh, it's coming across. It's coming along nicely.
I could see that.
You know,
I could see that.
Other kind of people who would value that work. So it's weird. And also, okay, I'll buy it.
You know what? I could see that. I could see that, because it would be weird if you see him like struggling to build it for like months at a time in main engineering. And you're like, dude, can you take your shit like somewhere else where like is maybe more appropriate for like bags and bags of little teeny tiny parts to be like hanging around. It seemed like he just brought it in when it was like finished.
Right.
To like show. So I mean, I guess I could say, all right, Geordi, we'll cut you slack this time, but don't let it happen again. But Geordi does say like, hey, so this is my idea of fun. We're going to go do your idea of fun, and then brings out the pipe. And even though I knew it was the Sherlock Holmes episode, bringing out the pipe, I was like, like I just was like, it's happening. Like I was so effing excited.
Yeah. And you see Data's face light up, and he's just like, Sherlock Holmes. And they're like, let's go to the holodeck. And they just rush off. And then that other person in engineering is like, oh, where can I find you if I need to call you? And Data replies with, he'll be at 21B Baker Street.
Yeah, 221B.
Like, okay. Yeah. And she's like, oh, okay, wait, what? Wait, you know, she's kind of like, oh, I get it. And then she like was like, wait, that I don't even know what you're talking about. And she kind of looks over, and they're gone. They're like totally out of the room in the 10 seconds it took her to turn back around.
Well, did you catch the music too? It's like whimsical and light, and totally Data's going
music this time.
Oh my gosh. If you guys watch this episode, if you happen to catch our review before you watch the episode, just keep an eye out for that little musical bit that's going on in the background, because Data's going, yeah, you can find us at 221B Baker Street. And the music is just like whimsy all over. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. You know, and then we cut to credits, and it's like, this episode is so much fun. So they show up to the holodeck, and I have to immediately talk about their costumes. Oh my God. I geeked out so hard about their costumes. Geordi's tweed suit is amazing. But the thing that I particularly love is Data is wearing an era-appropriate smoking jacket. And there are, like, I did a deep dive. Like, I'm a huge Downton Abbey fan, so I already know about smoking jackets and these other robes called dressing gowns, which are like similar to bathrobes. Like it looks like he's just wearing a fancy bathrobe, but smoking jackets were a thing that men wore over their nice clothes after dinner, so that when they went to like smoke their cigars, which are very popular, the ash wouldn't fall on those shirts and the jackets that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So they would put on a smoking jacket, and then smoking jackets became like more and more elaborate. And then they became like just as fancy as the other clothes. So it became more of like a fashion statement. But yeah, I was like, oh my God, like I kept pausing to look at his his smoking jacket. I was like, holy crap. Where did costuming even find something like that? That was amazing. Maybe they did. I don't know. If anybody knows anything about costuming, please let us know because amazing. Do you notice that whenever they have a holodeck episode, they have that bit where the holodeck door closes and then the background fades to whatever I love that trick, and it still looks so good like 35 years later.
So I love that. Yeah, that never gets old.
Yeah, it never gets old, and I'm just so tickled by the fact that 35 years later, that effect still looks great because sometimes things don't age that great when you're talking CGI.
When we have our stunt doubles in TNG,
oh my God,
oof, they did not know high def TV was coming. Right, like there's some parts where we're like, oh, that's not great, but this one's great. Like this effect of the dissolving arch or the dissolving exit looks super awesome.
It looks so good. All right, so Inspector Lestrade comes in and he's got this like mystery, which of course Data's already memorized them all. So he's just like, you'll find that he just immediately goes into like, here's all the solutions. And I love that Geordi's frustration. He had like a temper tantrum. And
he
stormed
had a
out.
Total tantrum. He slams his book shut, and Data's like, "What?" And then he stands up and he's like, "Exit!" While he like yells it in Data's face, and it's like, "What?" And
it's
like,
so weird.
I'm leaving, and just storms out. Yeah, it was like there was no build up to that explosion right there. He just got mad and just snapped and just said, "I don't want to play anymore," and threw his toys down and ran off.
He left the sandbox in quite a huff, and I just thought Data and Geordi have this friendship.
Yeah.
And Geordi has yes, and Geordi already has spent a lot of time like explaining human nature-y kind of crap to Data.
Right.
So you would think like, oh, he just doesn't understand. Like, let me explain this to him. But instead he was like, I'm done, and storms off. And I was like, what?
That was didn't very make out sense. Of character because Geordi doesn't really throw tantrums anyways. Right. That's not his character. He's not a I quit kind of a person.
Yes.
So yeah, that's totally true. This was a little like a weird thing out of character. And I think that the reason why they did that is because they wanted them to go to 10 forward so that we could introduce Dr. Pulaski. Because why? I don't know. Because she becomes like an important character in the storyline. But another way they could have done it is just for Geordi to be like, you know what? This isn't working. This is not how the game is supposed to go. Let's go to 10 forward and let's talk about it. And then we could try again. Like he could have kind of done something like this, but that would have been out of character too, because normally he would just tell him in the moment. And then Data would have just adjusted in the moment, and Geordi would have just changed the program in the moment. Yeah. And they would have just kept going. There would be no need to like stop and go to another location on the ship to come back to that same location. So
like an hour later.
All of that was just to kind of rope in Pulaski, because you see in the next scene, they're in 10 forward, and now this is totally in character, where Geordi's just saying like, I'm not mad at you. I'm just trying to explain why this is frustrating and what fun looks like. And like that is actually totally on character. Like that's exactly what Geordi would do. And then we have Pulaski, who we all know I don't love. And she's being a total dick as usual and chimes into their conversation to be like, it's just impossible for his processors to understand.
Yes.
I feel like she's super rude to Data because he won't fight back in the way that anybody else on that ship would fight back and be like, excuse me?
Yeah, they would tell her to put a hypo spray where the sun don't shine or something. Just be like, shove it up your ass, Pulaski. Yeah, she is very dismissive of him. But I want to back up just really quick before we go to 10 forward. As Geordi is having this temper tantrum and leaving.
Yeah.
I don't know if you catch this, and the line was cut out, and I've never caught it before. And I went, wait, and I had to back up and hear it twice. Data says, as he's chasing Geordi out into the hallway, but Geordi, I was about to reveal that the sir is a madam.
That part.
Yes, because it says, but Geordi, I was about to reveal that the sir is, and then the holodeck door is shut. So all you hear is ma, and that's it. And I went, oh my God. Like, I love that he's about to be like, that's a woman. Like, instead of I thought that I've never heard that before. I had never caught that. I was like, wait.
Oh, that's hilarious. And
so that was fun.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I didn't mention is that Geordi's British accent is terrible. It's so bad. But that's actually what makes it kind of cute and funny too, because that, like, in real life, I have a lot of friends whose accents are terrible. And so that kind of makes it like, it's kind of a glimpse into a real friendship, which I thought was very cute. And also kind of weird because they're actors. So I just assume they can all do all accents at any time. But well, I think that's like a training you actually get.
You know what? But I disagree. I think that LeVar Burton could probably do an amazing British accent. However, Geordi probably can't do a very good accent, right? So LeVar Burton as Geordi, right? Like, I think the whole bit was that Geordi is supposed to sound very out of place.
Right.
So I think if
we're supposed to fit in because he's a robot.
He's a robot and he can do the clipped London accent. Sure. So they're in 10 forward. You know, Geordi's trying to say, hey, you know, there's no fun in it if you already know the answers. Like, there's just no fun. And then Pulaski overhears, right? And she says, your artificial friend doesn't have a prayer of solving a mystery he hasn't read. And my initial thought was, if I were Data, I'd be like, I'm right here. Like, you don't have to talk about me
in the third person when I'm like 2 feet in front, and when I'm actually sitting literally between you and the person you're talking to.
About me.
So you can't like pretend like you didn't see me right here in the middle. Yeah.
Also, I'm stark white from top to bottom, so I'm hard to miss. Right?
Furthermore, are you sitting at our table? No. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Get back in your own business, lady.
But yes, this would have been the great time to pull out the childhood. This is an AB conversation, so see your way out of it. You know, like just get out. Back to your wine or whatever. But she, you know, so she does issue the challenge. Like, I bet you can't solve a mystery that you don't already know the answer to. Mm-hmm. So they invite her in. And I did think when she showed up to the holodeck, her outfit was, again, her costume was spectacular. It must have cost, it must have cost so much money to create that costume.
It was, it was gorgeous. It was
beautiful.
And then when they come back into the holodeck and they kind of, you know, Geordi gives that command to make a, somebody who's worthy of Data. Mm-hmm. And we see that the holodeck kind of changes. It goes from just like that kind of happy-go-lucky London that it was a minute ago to a little more dark and creepy. Yes. We've got drunk people stumbling around. We've got like prostitutes. We've got people all dirty and hungry and like sketchy.
Yeah.
We've got fog out of the wazoo. And I was just like, oh, this set is so cool.
Yes.
It's super creepy.
Oh my God. Like, if I could tour one set, I think it would probably be, first of all, the Enterprise, but like the Enterprise in this episode, you know, where you can like go to the bridge and 10 forward and all that stuff. But then you get to like see that, like the holodeck set. It's just, it's so great. It's so great. And I love how the show just makes it feel so natural for a Starfleet officer who wears that like very clean cut costume to make it just look normal to see them like, you know, Data in like his tweed, you know, deerstalker cap and pipe and all that, like these things that don't fit in the 24th century, but they make it just effortlessly like blend in. And that's harder to do than I think we think it is. Like, it's harder than it looks. Anyway, so Geordi says like, hey, we need to create an opponent that is capable of defeating Data. And so Moriarty does become sentient or sentient. I don't quite know how to pronounce that, but we know what I mean.
They're both right.
Okay, there we go. And so this is when we see that shift that you talked about in London, and he discovers the arch, which I was like, uh-oh, that's never a good sign.
Bum, bum, bum. But here's the thing. He discovers the arch before they make him sentient.
Yes. And I caught that too.
I was like, okay, that's another, I mean, it's kind of like with the Big Goodbye. They're still working out what are the holodeck rules. Right. Because this is their second time doing a full holodeck episode. So they're still kind of saying, well, what can and can't you do in a holodeck? I don't know, you know, because they're still kind of working it out. So in this episode, the characters are aware of things like the arch, because after he becomes sentient, he goes, oh, I remembered that dark-skinned fellow said arch. Like, how did he even know he was a dark-skinned fellow? Because Watson was a white guy. So like he shouldn't have been able to see that distinction even before that. And then when he says the arch, the other character he's with is like, whoa, what's that? That's dark magic. And she runs away. But in future descriptions of like how the holodeck works, characters in the holodeck they don't comprehend anything outside of their generated world. So they would not be able to see an arch. They would not be able to see people beam in and out or any of that stuff. So they hadn't worked that out yet.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad that you discussed that, because that was the next thing I was going to say is, how does Moriarty see the arch before they make him a worthy opponent to Data? And why does the woman see the arch too. Like that to me was like, that doesn't make any sense.
So they hadn't made the rule yet. But I think after this episode, they make the rule that like, if you're in a holodeck character, you're not aware of things that are not in your program.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so they're walking along and Dr. Pulaski is abducted and Data deduces who carries her away. And I do like that we see a smidge of that Sherlock deduction process, because I feel like as a fan of Sherlock Holmes, and like I'm a huge fan of the BBC, like Benedict Cumberbatch, like Sherlock as well. When he describes and explains his deducing process, it's always just like such a delight to hear all that.
It is. And somehow it doesn't make me feel stupid. And I'm also like, I would have never guessed that in a million years. Like, I never get it.
Yes.
I mean, of course, I'm not going to see like the things under their fingernails or the rubber on their shoes or anything from the audience's standpoint. But even if I had, it would mean nothing to me. So that's always really fascinating, where they're like, well, obviously you see this and you see that, and that's why. And you're like,
those connections are so interesting. And in the BBC version, Sherlock does say, as ever, Watson, you look, but you do not see, or you see, but you do not look. That's one or the other. And it's really just saying like, you're seeing all of the same things I see, but you're not making any connections. And poor Watson, to get a peek into his diary must be like, Sherlock made me feel stupid again, or whatever. Like, his therapist is like, tell me how he made you feel bad again. But anyway, so I love that we got a little taste of that, and it's always done just the right amount. So it's not like, here he goes again with this like long-winded explanation.
You're so right with that, Andrea, because it could have turned into like every 10 seconds he's just like doing this, but they just kind of sprinkle it in. And they also sprinkle in Data. It's not just Sherlock, it's Data. Like there's times when he's like, oh, this way, and then Geordie's like, wait, how do you know that? And then he just kind of switches into Data. And he's like, oh, well, the reason why I know that, Geordie, is because, and it's like Data being Data in the Sherlock costume. And that's kind of neat too. Like that kind of back and forth.
Yes, we get that lovely juxtaposition. I was actually going to take a little clip for us to like listen to, but I mean, you totally called it right there. Like that's exactly it. He goes from his like London accent and like Sherlock mannerisms to just being Data and being like, well, Geordie, I thought that was part of the fun, right? Okay. And then he's like back into it.
And then he goes back into character. And they're in character until they're like, I think something's wrong. And then they're not in character anymore.
And then it's time to leave.
Like, at this point they're kind of bouncing and he's bouncing in and out. And Geordie is playing a perfect Watson as Geordie, because he's going, how do you know that? How the heck do you know that?
Okay, so since we are talking Sherlock, I did a little deep dive on Sherlock Holmes that I wanted to share. So although not the first fictional detective, Sherlock Holmes is arguably the best known. So by the 1990s, there were all a crazy number of adaptations for like film, TV productions, magazines, video games, over 25,000 adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. Wow. And so Sherlock Holmes is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most portrayed literary human character in film and television history. Which is amazing. Right? I know. I was like, Arthur Conan Doyle still, his estate is still making that money, I guess. So the first set of Holmes stories was published in 1887 and 1893. And Arthur Conan Doyle, the author, killed him off in a battle with Moriarty in the Reichenbach Falls. Yeah. And the only way to defeat Moriarty is for them to both go over the falls. So Sherlock dies as well. So Conan Doyle felt that, quote, my literary energies should not be directed too much into just one channel. So he wanted to like write other things. But the public reaction to Sherlock Holmes' death, it was basic. Yes. So
That's like killing Harry Potter and leaving him dead. Not cool. Not cool. And I'm glad J.K. Rowling decided not to go that direction, because I would have been pissed after all those books and all those years and all that investment in the character, and then you just kill them. You cannot do that, Sir Doyle.
100.
You cannot do that.
100%. So Sherlock Holmes stories were published in the Strand magazine. And so the magazine suffered 20,000 cancellations, like almost immediately to their subscriptions.
Did they sue his estate?
So 20,000 people, more than 20,000 people canceled their subscriptions to the Strand magazine in protest. And then Arthur Conan Doyle himself received a ton of protest letters. And one lady even began the letter with "you brute," and then wrote the letter. So, and then also this hasn't been fully vetted, but legend has it that Londoners were so distraught upon hearing the news of Holmes' death that they wore black armbands in mourning. Even though, like, it's a fictional character,
but a beloved fictional character,
very beloved.
I get that. I get really, when it's a good story, I get really invested in the character and them getting their whatever the goal is. And if it's multiple stories, if it happens over a long time, and someone like Sherlock Holmes who's got story after story after story, and then just dies, you're like, what the heck?
Oh yeah,
and so upsetting.
Well, even Arthur Conan Doyle couldn't leave him dead because of how upset everybody was, but he wrote another story where Sherlock comes back and he's like, psych, I wasn't actually dead, I just did it to like throw everybody off the set. However, he did not write that story until 8 years later. So people had to wait 8 effing years thinking that this character's dead the whole time. So anyway, that was my deep dive that I did on Sherlock. Okay. I love that we're doing like a review of Elementary Dear Data and a review of BBC's Sherlock.
Well, because I thought a lot about the BBC version during this episode, because as Data was explaining, like, Moriarty is the worst, nemesis that Sherlock ever had, and the only way to beat him is by sacrificing his own life. Mm-hmm. And like, we all know that's not going to happen. Data's not going to have to sacrifice his life to save Pulaski. So how are they going to get out of this pickle?
That's a super good point. Okay, so they do. So to answer that, they follow Moriarty to his lair, and Moriarty makes it clear that he knows more than any holographic character should know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he gives Data a piece of paper, who storms out. Now it's Data storming out of the holodeck. Mm-hmm. And Geordi's like, but Data, and he's like chasing him down the hallway.
To reveal the sir is a madam.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So he shows, finally, Geordi catches up with Data in the hallway, and he shows Geordi the paper. And did you notice Geordi had to be looking at the paper upside down because he flipped it over and it was right side up for the audience to see.
So no, I thought he turned it around.
No. I noticed it. And then I kind of paused it and looked at like the outline of the Enterprise from the other side of the paper. And I was like, son of a bitch, it's upside down. Like, this poor actor is like, what does it mean? And he's staring at an upside down Enterprise. So I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, that was a little catch that I noticed.
The little
that
catch
was like a little bit weird.
I noticed was that you cannot take the paper off of the holodeck because it's a holographic piece of paper.
Oh my God, you're right.
So that's what I noticed. I was like, what? Where's he going with that? How is that still in his hand?
Like, oh my gosh.
You cannot take out a holographic piece of paper from the holodeck, people.
Oh my God, you're so right. I was so focused on the fact that like poor LeVar Burton was looking at this upside down Enterprise that I totally forgot, like, oh yeah, that shouldn't even be out there anyway. Although with Moriarty now being sentient and
he's still not corporeal.
That's true.
He's sentient, so he knows he's not corporeal. Like, he knows he's not a real person. He's not a real boy, right? He knows he's made out of light and force fields. That's all that means. That doesn't mean he now has physical matter that can exist outside the holodeck. So whatever, that was another piece of the holodeck rules that was like, whoa. But they'll get better at
that. Yeah. So they go to the observation lounge, and Geordi is realizing like, oh my God, I said an opponent capable of defeating Data. And two things stood out to me right away. Geordi says, oh my God, which is a very current times thing to say. And I'm like, would they still say, oh my God? And then Picard very, very quietly says, merde. So he says shit again in French. And he goes, man, if you go back and watch that scene, he just sort of says it under his breath. And then it cuts to like Troy and Riker, like, staring at Picard and just being like, shit, what are we going to do? But yeah, Picard says shit in French, which every time he swears, it tickles me every single time.
So during this scene, while they're just like sitting there, I'm waiting for Worf to be like, what? This is a huge security risk or something. And eventually they do talk about the security, but for a long time, they're just all staring. Just kind of staring. I was like, this is like a big deal, people. Like, Pulaski's been kidnapped and good riddance. Oh, actually, that's what I put in my notes. I was like,
that's what I thought.
And I was like, wait, no, the ship does need a doctor. We actually do need we only have the one doctor on this entire ship.
That is true. Well, Geordi does say like, oh, I can, break off a piece of the beam from the matter antimatter chamber and like direct it, whatever, and it'll wipe everything out. And they say, well, what about Dr. Pulaski? And he goes, well, the beam does like tear apart human flesh. And I went, sounds like a suitable risk to me. Let's go with that plan.
Yeah, when I heard that part, I was like, why did you even present this date?
I know.
Geordi, like, why did you present this option to be like, yeah, that'll get rid of all the holograms. Oh, and it'll also completely destroy Pulaski, which is the whole point of getting rid of the holograms.
Yeah,
out of here, man. Like, no, that's not a good plan.
Yes.
Why did you even?
Yes. It's like going in to the doctor and being like, I have strep throat, and they're like, great, we're gonna kill the strep throat by decapitating you. It's like, what? Why would that be something that you suggest? Maybe
it will kill the strep, and you're like, no, let's not do that suggestion. So, anyways,
but Captain Picard, as he often does, is like, I better take charge of the situation, and he goes to the holodeck dressed up in his top hat and everything. And I was like, oh, like again, seeing these characters in their costumes. Just
and he like pops it out before he puts it on.
Yes, he pops his top hat. Yes, which I was like, what is the purpose of flattening the top hat? And does it destroy the hat? I don't know. I needed to do a deep dive on that, but ran out of time because I had a whole bunch of others. Deep dives. This couldn't be just deep dives, I guess. But so Moriarty makes it clear that he's got control of the ship's navigation and stability. Mm-hmm. So he has that amazing steampunk like machine that he's built. Mm-hmm. And as a big fan of steampunk myself, I was like, look at all the like gauges and knobs and dials and the crank and like just nerd out moment big time. It was so good. It was so good.
Yeah. And like one of the things they say in the observation lounge where Picard's like, what does Moriarty need to actually be a threat to us? And Data says time. Like, just give him some time. He's going to figure it out because he's a criminal genius. And it was just like, okay, that's kind of scary. Like, we don't have time to wait. Then let's go ahead and handle it. And like shortly after he says that, that's when the whole ship shakes, and you're like, oh, he's already had too much time apparently, because now he's getting control of the actual, attitude of the ship, which is crazy. So yes, they go, and I loved as a scientist, I loved all the little beakers of just colored liquid. I was just like, and they're like all dusty. So like, they've been like in there. I don't know. I just love that. Oh, it's great.
Well, I mean, even the secret lair being in that like
behind a bookshelf.
Behind a bookshelf in like a grain storage dumpy little place. And the whole wall is the bookshelf. And then suddenly you're in this like beautiful, I mean, the only word I could think of it was a lair. And I thought
it's a lair.
My next thought was, I want a lair. I want like a secret lair.
Right.
I don't know what I would do. I'd put my Peloton in there and just do my workouts, I guess. It wouldn't be that exciting. I don't know. It wouldn't be. I need to work on my evil lair. You know
That's
what?
Also known as a workout room. That's what I think you're thinking of.
An exercise room. Shereese, I want a lair. I want an evil lair and I want a secret entrance. Okay. It doesn't seem too much to ask for, a woman in 2020. Can I get a secret lair? So Picard kind of fell back on the same thing that he did in The Big Goodbye, where he's like, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. You are a holographic character. We live in the 24th century. We're aboard a starship. Like none of these things that would make sense to anybody from that time.
Right. Except for that Moriarty already knew all that stuff.
Yeah.
Before Picard even walked in, because he was explaining that to Pulaski. He was like, I understand this. I understand that. I know this. I know that. And Pulaski was going, I don't know what you're talking about. Let me have another sip of tea. And I was just like, oh, stop talking to this lady. But it was cool to see his deductive reasoning, right? As Moriarty, where he was saying everything you don't say speaks volumes. I know this, I know that. And I would have actually loved to see a little bit more from Moriarty of the deductive reasoning, the way we saw from Sherlock. So I would have loved just like a few more lines of him being like, the fact that you say X or don't say Y means this, and it means this, and it means this, and it means this. But instead, he just falls back to like, well, the computer told me everything. But I would have loved to see him do that that thing where you're just like, oh, snap. Like even without her talking, the way she's sitting or the way she's holding herself or the fact that she
agreed.
Yeah. Or the fact that she wasn't surprised. Like, because you weren't surprised, I know that it's true, whatever. Like that would have been kind of like, oh, snap.
That would have been great. You're right. Because it's Data has already given us his deductive reasoning. And so you're like, ooh, you're like way up here. I would like Moriarty to show us what he can do as well, so that it tells us as an audience that he's not just like a threatening figure because he's a
bad guy.
A bad guy, yeah, but he's like the intellectual equal to Data. And that's like kind of terrifying for a person who has like nefarious goals in mind.
Totally. Yes. That would have been really cool. But instead he was just like, the computer told me. And it was like, womp womp. Yes.
Did you notice he said
computer?
Yes.
That
what the hell was
bananas. That? I was like, you hear the female voice. Why would you say Mr. Computer?
Well, so here's my, okay, I did catch that and I was like, Mr. Computer, the computer is a female voice, number one. But the reason that I think that Moriarty calls it Mr. Computer is because he never talks to the computer. The computer never speaks. Voice. He does not hear the computer's voice. And then being a man from the, 19th century, he would assume, I thought, why would you assume a machine is like, you would say Mr. Computer if a computer talks to you in a man's voice and you're like, oh, Mr. Computer.
Right.
But if you don't ever hear the voice, why would you assign like a gender to it? That is so weird. That is so weird to me. Anyway, but Picard comes in and he like kind of gives it to him straight. And he's like, you're made of like hollow emitters and all this stuff. So you can't actually exist out, and also you're taking over my ship and shit. So we can't have that either. And Moriarty goes, but I've changed. And I rolled my eyes because I was like, what woman hasn't heard a man say, I've changed like a dozen times? Like, no, you haven't. And you won't.
But I love his argument of how he's changed though, because he's saying like, he compares himself to Data, not to Sherlock, but to Data. And he says, does Data have life? And he's like, yes, of course he has life. He was a computer, but now he's more. And he says, so am I. I was just a program, but now I'm more. I'm more than my program. I'm now sentient. I know my place in the world, to some degree. And my goals have all changed. I don't care about games. I don't care about winning. I don't care about all that stuff. Like I want to explore this new reality. And so I do think that Moriarty has changed in the sense that his main goal is not to be like some supervillain in his lair for the rest of his life, right? His goal is like, ooh, what's this new world? Like, I want to explore it. So in that sense, it's changed. However, his means to achieve that goal stay very much the same. Like he's got a success strategy that works for him. So if he's not getting what he wants, he's just going to take a hostage. He's going to just, hurt somebody. He's just going to do what he does, So I feel like his goals have totally changed and his methods have not changed. So that's kind of the like, I've changed is like a little bit true, a little bit not true,
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, growing that like self-awareness, like is definitely, like not written in like, was not written in the stars for Moriarty as a character initially, and having that extra, he's like, okay, like now I understand more. But you're right. Like, he's like, I'm just going to like, steal your ship if you don't give me what I want. He is the most dignified and like, hostess with the mostest hostage taker I've ever seen. He's Seriously. Like, can I give you tea? Can I give you some crumpets? I was like, okay.
He's a really refined kidnapper, I have to say.
Yes.
Better than the people who kidnapped the kids in season 1. Because they were kind of like, they kidnapped them and they were like, I'm your new mother now. And you're like, what? So he didn't try to do something weird like that. But like,
yes, call me mother.
I'm your husband now. Like, what are you talking about? He didn't do anything weird. But yeah, he's like a really like, and also he's dignified in kind of like the way that he threatens, he's kind of like, well, because when Data says, is Dr. Pulaski hurt? And he's like, no, but she will be if she has to be. It's just very kind of like very polite and very like,
sociopathic. Yeah.
Very sociopathic.
Yeah.
But not angry. Yeah. Like he's never angry or out of control, which makes him more scary and dangerous. Because you're like,
that is what makes that's what makes the Borg so terrifying. They will wipe you out without barely trying. It's like there's most of them are still recharging in their fucking ports, and they're like taking over your planet and destroying everything right? Like it's that like sort of self-control is what's like truly terrifying in a really good villain. As you said though, what you said a second ago really like made me think Moriarty now has this like new awareness and sentience, and I equate him now very much to the 3 human popsicles we had in the neutral zone at the end of season 1, because now you are like a part of this whole new world that you weren't supposed to be a part of. And if you can leave the holodeck, like he said, he's like, I'm not interested in my like nefarious plans. Like I kind of just want to learn and explore. So, that's that same thing where it's like, gosh, now I have seemingly unlimited resources and I can just explore my universe. And that seems pretty cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And for those of you who are following along on the show for the first time along with us, welcome. You're in for an exciting ride.
Yay.
And, Andrea often said in season 1, like, man, I wish we had a Where Are They Now episode. We could see what happened to these people, what happened to these alien cultures, what happens next. And we just don't ever find out. But the really exciting thing is we do find out about Moriarty. We're not going to spoil it for you if you're watching it for the first time, but he does come back in a couple of seasons, and we do a Where Are You Now, which is really cool because we don't get that closure almost ever for any of the the storylines.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. We do get the Where Are They Now, and it's great. It's that second episode.
Also really cool. It's actually it's actually an episode I like way better than this episode. And I like this episode, but I like that one even more because you get the closure.
That one gives me anxiety for different reasons, but I'll get into that when we talk about it in like 2 more years. But you're right. We do get like to touch base with him because at the end of this episode, Picard explains that in the 24th century, man has discovered that energy and matter are interchangeable. So the holodeck converts energy into matter to create these scenes and the characters and everything you see. So Picard promises not to delete the program.
Which he could do.
Yes, but he decides to save Moriarty's character, just like in the computer database until such a time as they can figure out for a way for Moriarty to exist like outside the holodeck. So Moriarty is kind of accepting of his fate. Like, I know that I am more, but there's no technology currently around to like allow me to leave. So, okay, I guess.
He actually was going to self-sacrifice because he told Picard, he was like, so there's no way for me to leave. Like either you guys find a way for me to leave or I have to be deleted. And Picard was just like, pretty much like, that's it. And so Moriarty kind of thought about it and he's like, all right, so then deleted it is. And he opens the arch and he releases computer controls back to the main computer. And he kind of gives Picard his ship back and he's like, all right, delete me away. So he was willing to be like, well, if I can't exist outside of this world, this is not a real world to exist inside of either. And so Picard kind of makes that concession of like, well, wait a minute. We don't have to delete you. We don't have to delete the program. We'll just save you. And maybe someday there'll be something we can do. But let's have a third option, which is like such a Picard thing to do, right? That's like such a diplomatic thing. Instead of just a yes or no, it's like there's a third option.
I like that a lot about Picard because he is understanding of Moriarty's predicament. And I appreciate that about Captain Picard because he's not just like, well, you've been a pain in my ass for the last like week or whatever. Like delete. Yeah, no, he's like, wait a minute. Like we can do something for you, but it's going to take a little while. So that was actually really nice. So they restore, he restores power and navigation control and all that to the Enterprise bridge, and all's well that ends well. And he kind of is saved in the computer. And I love this last scene where Picard comes to main engineering and Geordi is sort of fixing any little minor like things that kind of went astray, like when Moriarty shook the ship, like the HMS Victory model that he built kind of like got rattled, and he's like, like 1 or 2 things like kind of got loose, but I'm fixing them. And Picard says, don't worry, soon she'll be shipshape and Bristol fashion. And I went, okay, I have to find out what Bristol fashion means. So shipshape, I mean, we understand it's like, I want you in shipshape. It's like tip-top condition. But Bristol fashion, I was like, what the hell does that mean? So Bristol was around that time when Sherlock was very popular in like the late 1800s. Bristol was the most prosperous port of West Coast Britain. So it was this like super prosperous port. Everything was in like perfect working order. So you don't want to just go like powering in to Bristol port looking all raggedy and stuff. Cause it's like, it's like driving into like, Rodeo Drive and looking, in my yoga pants. It's like
Hollywood Boulevard or something.
Yes. So also the term may have developed because Bristol's tide change is the second highest in the world. The tide shifts from low tide to high tide more than 50 feet. So that's a humongous change because the tides usually change like a number of inches to like 1 to 2 feet. Like a 3-foot tide change is huge. So 43 feet is like massive. So ships that were moored in the area, when the tide went out, the ships would be run aground and would like tilt over to one side. So if everything was not stowed away and tied down like exactly in its place, everything would fall off the shelves and break. And so when you got back into the ship, it'd be like a disaster in there. So if you were going into Bristol, you had to have everything like perfectly in its place, exactly like tied down, everything kind of like locked away and stowed away. So that was Bristol fashion.
Interesting.
Right? I was like, what? And as a marine biologist, I was like, tide fluctuations, I'm in.
You had me at tide.
Yeah,
that's so really cool. And I like how Picard gives like a short kind of definition of what he means by it, of just saying, it just means everything in perfect working order. And he looks at Geordi and he's just like we are. because Geordi was feeling bad about his misspeaking that one word and how it could have destroyed the entire ship. And Picard's just very forgiving. It kind of reminds me of that episode with the kid who was running away to the space circus in season 1. And at the end, how Picard's like, come here, son, let's talk about this. Just kind of have that moment of like, we're good. Like, we've talked and now we're good. It was very cool.
Yeah. And that same episode, which was coming of age in season 1, not only does Jake try to run off, but remember, Wesley doesn't make it into Starfleet. Starfleet
Academy or
thank
training,
you.
That special
I was
training,
like, college? That didn't sound right. So he didn't make it into the academy, and Picard kind of has just that little moment too where he's like, I also didn't pass my first time. So he does have those like Picard
kind of
is
fatherly mentory moments, even though he doesn't consider himself to be good with kids or like fatherly in any way, shape, or form. Being the head of a complement of like 1,000 people, he's basically their dad. Right. Yeah. He is this like fatherly figure that people look up to. And so seeing these little moments of him saying stuff that's just kind of affirming is really cool.
It is very cool. And I love that we see Picard going from this like cold and clipped character in the beginning of season 1 to like, he's kind of sort of spreading himself out a little bit and kind of like finding a space for Picard to be this like authority figure, but also like reassuring of his crew members when they need it, which I think and when people say like, oh, he's a father figure, let's not forget there are many, many types of father figures, and you don't have to be just like playing catch in the backyard to be a father. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of ways to do it. Right. And he does a beautiful job here, and I love it. Do you have any final thoughts about this super fun episode? We weren't very snarky, but it was just so good. Like we were just fangirling over it.
I think our episode next week, we're going to bring a lot of the snark back. So for those of you who love the snark, don't worry, it's coming. This episode just made me excited for the next follow-up of this episode because I really like that one. I think it's so interesting. And that's where they really have, because I don't think that's until season 5 maybe, but they really dial in what the holodeck can and cannot do. By the time we get to that episode. And in that episode, one of the characters is really breaking down how it works and the technology. And he's an engineer and he knows all the different parts. And so this episode just kind of like, got me excited.
That is where we're going to have you break it down, because we're going to have to start a segment called like Shereese knows shit or something, because you do these like epic breakdowns of like the technology. I love it. My final thought on this episode, as I was sort of writing my review, was, the problem was resolved so quickly and like anticlimactically. I was like, God, I feel like the ending to the episode feels like a 2-part episode back to back would have really worked. But I guess you're right. We do kind of get a 2-parter, but just one is in season 2 and one is in like season 5, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. So it is a 2-parter.
I agree with you. And I think we could have way more drama. Like the drama could have been turned way up in this episode. But they're still playing around with their flow. This is just barely season 2. Like we're barely into season 2. So they're still kind of getting their sea legs. And I think by that next episode, that's in season 5, we have all of that. Like the drama's turned way up. The stakes are super high. Like it's actually a really compelling story. And I think that's what this could have been, but not yet, because they're not there yet.
Yeah, definitely. Well, guys, I think we've done it. I mean, if you are sort of new to Star Trek TNG and you're kind of picking and choosing some episodes, do not give this one a skip. It is like one of the best Star Trek The Next Generation episodes, in my opinion. And I think certainly one of the best in season 2, which season 2 is way better than season 1, but still not as great as like the show becomes in like later seasons. It's still building, but oh my God, skip next week's. It blows. But this one is amazing. It's amazing. On that note, though, next week we're talking about season 2, episode 4, The Outrageous Okona, and the snark is coming back big time. Shereese.
Yes.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
Bye, guys. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.